In today's video, we're going to be designing a cool sci-fi barrel. Let's get started. Now before we get started, let's discuss exactly what you're going to need. So first of all, we're going to be using some custom made materials in this tutorial. And we actually had these designed by a professional material designer. They cost us around 50 bucks each. We're going to have a lot more come in. But if you want to get these 3 materials for free, you're basically getting $150 worth of materials for free. So head over to our website. You can pick those up. I'll link them in the description. If you're on our email list, you should have received an email with these a few weeks ago. So make sure if you're not on our email list, get on there. If you're not, I don't know what you're doing. You're missing out on a lot of cool stuff. So you can join our email list in the link in the description. Number 2, this tutorial is not going to be for super beginners. If you are a beginner, head over to our Jumpstart course on our site. Plenty of stuff in there for you to get started. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start with a basic cylinder. So let me go ahead, press Shift A, cylinder, and I'm going to give this like 100 vertices because I'm not particularly concerned with the vertex count here. I'm just going for a cool render. Now let's go ahead and right click to shade smooth and we can start designing. So what I kind of imagine with this particular design is I want there to be like a, something on the top here, maybe where you can pour in a liquid or something, and the bottom's just going to have a cool looking design. And it's going to be a little bit more visually appealing than a basic cylinder. So what I think I'm going to do here is maybe go into face mode and bevel this bottom face. Just make a chamfer like that. And then maybe here for the top, what I could do is I could extrude this up, maybe scale this down a bit. And I'm just trying to get an outline of something that kind of resembles, a barrel or something like this. Now what I want to do is I want to go into edge mode and alt click on these edges here, and we're just gonna make a nice bevel, not too big, maybe right around there, and that should get the job done. And mainly my initial goal here is to kind of get the form defined, the overall silhouette of this design, so that way we can build on top of it. Now if you're unfamiliar with the design principles that go into designing hard surface objects with a good form, if you head over to our subscribers cove, it's the same link I'm linking for the materials pack I mentioned. There's also a design PDF on there you can go through. It discusses some of the some of the essential design principles you'll need to use when you're designing hard surface models like this. So anyways, I'm going to explain them here as well. Basically, when you're adding detail, you want to be careful as to how you're placing it. Generally, I like to follow the 70-30 rule, which means we have 30% of area with detail and the other 70% of space is more or less empty space. And I do like to bias that more towards the upper third or lower third or whatever of the object. So I'm going to be using box cutter here, and what we're going to do is click and drag, and I'm just going to make a small slice operation right here. So if we cut through and press the X key and then double click, we'll basically have this cut right here. And you're going to see just by introducing that line, we already have a little bit more emphasis on the overall form here. On top of that, what this is doing for us is it's basically defining, functionality as well. For example, you can kind of imagine this lid right here. Now that we have this slice, could kind of be, if I were to apply that balloon, it could be taken off or something like that. So it's a really good idea to try to combine the elements of form to also imply functionality, if that makes sense. So what I would recommend doing now is maybe adding in a bevel. Press Q and then bevel, Q and then bevel here as well, and that's just going to give us a slight indentation there. The bevel is going to really highlight that form. Plus every object in the real world does have a bevel on the edges, whether it's big or small. So now that we kind of have the general silhouette, and by the way, if you don't have the viewport looking like mine, make sure you go to Matcap, turn on cavity, set it to both, and just copy my settings here, and you'll have the same viewport as I do. Now what I like about cavity is it really allows us to see these edges, these edge highlights, and to understand the form a lot better. Now what I want to do here is go into edge mode and alt click on this edge and then bevel it. Put like a really small bevel right there. And you can already see without even adding in materials here, this thing already looks like a big chunk of metal, right? And that's kind of what I'm going for. just looking at the solid view, you can kind of see this thing is very strong, robust, and probably heavy just by looking at it. So that's why, using bevels and different shapes like this is very, very powerful. Now that we have the general kind of outline going, what we could think about is introducing some functional elements to this particular design. So I kind of imagine, maybe there's like a hatch here, maybe this something gets pulled off the top or whatever. So maybe what I could do is click and drag and then run another slice operation here, press the X key and kind of get something like that. And then we kind of have like a double type of design going. But maybe before I do that, what I could do is add in another cylinder, right click to shade smooth. And if I go into top view, by the way, sorry if you can hear my computer. My CPU cooler is completely broken, so I'm just waiting for a new one to arrive. So the fans are going crazy. Anyways, what I want to do here is take this cylinder and shift click on this little thing here on the top, and then we're going to run a difference boolean. And if it doesn't work here, probably just interfering with something. I'm just going to kind of scale that down a bit, move this down to about there. And then what I would like to do is take this face right here and introduce what I call a reverse bevel. And we can do that by pressing Alt-N to flip the normals. And then if we bevel this, it's actually going to bevel in the opposite direction, which is super cool. And then we basically have this little design here. And maybe what I could do is go into face mode for this cutter as well and just bevel this area a bit. So now we kind of have like a nice bevel there on the inside. I do need to move this up a bit because I don't have the boolean running on this object as well. So what I could do is shift click on this object, run the difference boolean on that object as well. So now it's affecting this one and this one. Then what we're going to do is just bevel this area, get ourselves like a nice bevel on the inside. Looks pretty good. And just like that, we have a pretty cool kind of opening there in the top. So now what I could do is go back in here. We could run our slice operation and then just do something cool like that just to make it look more visually appealing. And then what I would like to do here is maybe introduce another cylinder, and this could be like the cap. So maybe this is like the hatch. It kind of, well, not really a hatch, but something that you can kind of pull off to maybe pour in a liquid or something like that. Some hazardous material, whatever it may be, depending on the context of this design. Then what I could do here is I could do a bevel like that, or I could try a chamfer. Sometimes just down to whatever you prefer. I think the chamfer looks good. It kind of echoes the chamfers we already have, but I think a regular bevel here would be okay as well. It just kind of depends on your style and what you're feeling. So I'm just going to go for a chamfer on this one, and that should be good. Alright, looks fantastic. And now what I want to do at this point is I want to maybe right here on the side introduce some sort of latch, so maybe this whole thing can be pulled off. So I'm going to go ahead and press Shift A and then add in a cube, and I'm just going to scale this down. I'm going to move it up to about here. And I'm also going to scale it a bit on the Y, so that way it's not completely square, it's a bit rectangular. And then I could scale this up, and I'm going to have about a third of this affecting this area, and then the other 2/3 below it. So now what I'm going to do, I just pull this back. We're going to shift click on this object and run a difference boolean, and then shift click on this object and run a difference boolean there as well. Now this is way too massive, so what I'm going to do is scale this a bit. Scale it a bit on the Y as well. Control A to apply the scale, and then I'm just going to go into edge mode, take these 4 edges and then bevel them. Give it a nice amount of segments there. And now we kind of have room to, pull this back a bit and then insert some sort of latch or something. So you could design your own latch, or you could use something like KitOps, which has a bunch of kind of pre-built inserts you can use. I love KitOps. You can use the free version. It's fine. It's a Blender add-on. So if I go here into KitOps, you're not going to have all the same ones I do because I have different packs that do different things, but there is a really awesome pack that you can download. It's called the HardOps Classic Inserts, which basically has like screws and things like that. In this HardOps subsets, I believe this comes with that pack, or it comes with KitOps as well. You can just search it and you'll be able to find it. You could design your own latch. I'm just going to find one in here that looks good. Maybe the one I used from my window tutorial recently. So maybe this hinge right here, we could add that in. And then we could move this back. Let's try again. Click on Add Insert. There we go. I guess you have to make sure nothing's selected or it might not work. And then I'm just going to rotate this 90 degrees and then 90 degrees on the Z. And then in wireframe mode, I should be able to just kind of, move this back. Kind of get this into position. I could also try rotating this SZ -1 to flip it. But I think in this direction is a bit cooler. And basically, you're going to see all these different elements attached to it. All this really is, this one right here, we don't even need. I'm just going to delete that. But this wireframe piece on the outside is basically a Boolean cutter parented to the actual object. So what I could do here is use this as a Boolean on this object. So it might override the one I already made, but that's okay. So let's shift click on this object, run the difference Boolean. I might need to go to Everscroll and pull that back a bit so it's in farther. And then shift click on this one. We're going to run that same cutter on this area as well. Looks a bit crazy. Maybe I could try rotating this 180 degrees on the Z axis and maybe run the cut that direction. That looks a bit better. I know the shading's going crazy. I know it doesn't look very good right now, but the important part before we fix that is that it actually looks like we have some sort of latch on the object now, which is very important. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, manage these artifacts. The reason these artifacts are occurring is because the bevel starts overlapping with that surrounding geometry. So honestly, what we could do is, before we do the final render, we could remove the bevel modifier and simply use a bevel shader, which won't cause those artifacts. But for right now, I'm just going to make the bevel a little bit smaller here and here. I'll leave the artifacts alone because we can just use a bevel shader later on. If you did want to fix these, you'd either have to make the bevel very small until they go away, or you would have to actually take the Boolean, apply it, and then dissolve out some of those near miss, pieces of geometry to fix that up. I do not think that's a smart choice. Instead, what I'm going to do is just leave it alone, and then before we do the render, we'll remove the bevel and use a bevel shader. So that's how you're going to fix the artifacts, but what about the shading issues we have going on here? And if you've been using Blender before and use Booleans, you should know that running a Boolean on a curved surface that causes n-gons, for example, if I apply this, you're going to see we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6. So 6 vertices for this one face, which is effectively an n-gon. And when you have n-gons on curved surfaces, the shading goes crazy. That's why it's nasty here. But on all these quads right here, we have no issues. So the easiest way to fix this without having to retopologize everything, especially for a render, you don't need to do any sort of retopology because it doesn't matter. Instead, what I would recommend doing, let me undo this. I want to make sure the bevel is still live. What we can do is we can isolate the shading. So check this out. If I press Control R and push the loop cut right about here, now this portion is all quads, 1, 2, 3, 4 vertices on the curved surface. And now the n-gons here are much, much smaller. If I were to apply this, you're going to see the n-gons are super, super small, which means the shading issues are only extending from here down to here. And also for this area, you're going to have some shading problems as well. And here, but you're going to see they're not as noticeable. You can't really see them. If you wanted to make them perfectly removed, if you wanted to completely get rid of them, you would either have to retopologize or you would have to use a normal transfer. That's kind of like the only solution to fix that. But in my opinion, for concept renders, the shading, as long as it's isolated, is completely fine. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as is. I can't even see the shading right now. It looks almost perfect, especially from this direction. Now, in terms of what's happening back here, let me recall this cutter real quick. Maybe move this back. There's some Z fighting going on amongst other things. To figure out exactly what that is, maybe what we could do is we could try changing this over to exact. Sometimes that helps fix it. However, in this case, what I think is causing this problem is something to do with some of these other booleans right here. So maybe, I don't know what this one even is, to be honest. There's like a weird overlapping boolean, so let me just delete that. I think maybe I ran the boolean twice by accident and it caused some problems. But basically, once that's sorted, you should have this really clean looking design right here. And this is one of the most important parts of designing these types of concept pieces, whether they're complex or simple. It really doesn't matter. The important part here is making sure you have some sort of implied functionality on your objects. If you're, making this to be used in the real world, the engineer is probably going to make it work, whereas you're just making the concept design and using your design skills to create it, right? So what I'm going to do now is mirror this piece to the other side here. So let's go ahead. I could either mirror the object itself, or I could just simply mirror the cutter object. So it's going to be easier to mirror the cutter, because if I mirror the pieces, I'm going to have to mirror this one and then mirror this one as well. So it'll just save us some time. So what I'm going to do is press Q, ever scroll, and with this selected, we can press Alt X. I have mine set to advanced and mirror over the cursor, and then we click here, and now it's going to mirror to the other side just like that. And now we have to select the actual hatch here, press Alt X and mirror that one as well. And now we basically have the design here on the left and on the right, or the front and back. So far so good. Looks nice. I especially like how the design looks now that we've added that. It actually looks like it could be a real object. So that's the importance of adding in these smaller details that also imply functionality. They really make the form look a lot more interesting as well. So I definitely like how this looks. We can take a look at the front. Looks great. And now what I'm thinking we could do is maybe introduce some sort of little trussing effects here on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and press D, go into the Angon cutter. I'm going to make sure I'm in view align, so that way I'm cutting off this view. Then I'm going to click here and then drag. Going to cut over to here and then cut over to here, double click, and then we're just going to cut straight through the object right through here. It's going to be a miracle if my PC survives this recording, because the CPU temps are sitting at like 80 Celsius while modeling. I think the pumps on my cooler completely died, so I just reordered the same one, and hopefully that'll fix it, because I need my PC to work. Anyways, what we're going to do here is we're going to bevel these two edges on the bottom just a little bit, and then here on the top we're going to bevel these, and now we kind of have this nice design there on the bottom. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press, with this cutter selected, I'm going to press the D key, make sure we're still in Angon cutter, and I'm going to turn off cyclic. This will basically solidify our Angon cutter. So if I cut here and press the T key, what we're going to basically have is this nice trussing effect. So super cool. I can also adjust the solidification on it if I need to, and then I can move this over a bit, and then I'll press Alt X to mirror that to the other side, and now we have this cool little design here on the bottom. Now I do need to make sure we introduce a bevel here in the middle. So what I'm going to do is simply recall this cutter, and since I actually cut the cutter object, I need to apply this boolean, and we'll go in here, add some bevels, and then add some bevels here as well. Do the same thing here on this side. Bevel this piece, and then I can just mirror this to the other side without issues, and there we go. Now we have this cool design there on the bottom. Now, a general rule of thumb in order to know if you're getting a cool looking form for your object is to make sure everything looks clean from all different directions. So, side, top, and of course the right views like this. So you can see each of these sides does look pretty clean. Like, we have a lot of detail here. We have some detail here. We could definitely add in more secondary elements. On this side, we don't really have too much. And I also noticed on this side, we need to mirror this as well, just to make sure that's on the other side. There we go. But for right now, this side has a lot of detail. Let's try adding in some stuff here to the top to make it look more visually interesting. Now, I think what we could do here is maybe introduce a cube and scale this down. Make this cube really, really tiny. Move this up, scale this up, and then shift click on this to run a difference boolean. And then we'll kind of have this small notch here. Now let me also go to the bevel and press the A key, and then just slightly move my mouse to catch that edge. I also need to make this bevel a little bit smaller. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to recall this cutter. I'm going to press Q, Mesh Tools, and then Control click on Radial Array. And then I can just scroll up and kind of introduce these little notches. Now I think these look good, but they're a little bit too excessive. So what I'm going to do is maybe use like, I don't know, just a few of them. And I think this is a little bit less heavy. It just has a little bit more visual appeal and looks good, so I'm going to leave that alone. This is more of a design choice more than it is a functionality choice, so I just think it looks cool. And also, since the shading is stretching a bit, I can go ahead and isolate that by adding in a loop cut just like that. Now I'm going to go back into top view here, and I'm going to take this face, I'm going to inset it once with the I key, and then inset it again, and then grab this and move it down on the Z axis just a little bit. And maybe I could bevel this. And then maybe I could bevel this edge as well. Just to kind of see how that looks. It's kind of interesting. I think I want to stick with the basics though. Just figured I'd give it a try. So I'm trying to think what we could add next here. It's kind of just a matter of progressive, iteration, building on top of this over and over. So let's try adding in another slice here. Basically what I'm going for is a lot of the detail concentrated here on the upper third, and then the other portion down here is more or less empty space. But what I could do is maybe add like a visual separation here by using another slice operation, and that could kind of pull this together even more. So maybe this piece detaches or something like that. Could work. Now when you're designing, it's very important to remember that not all the detail has to come from the modeling process. In fact, a lot of what people do when they're designing, especially these pro designers you'll find on ArtStation, a lot of their detail comes from external factors like Photoshop, decals, trim sheets, things like that. You don't have to model in all the detail. Generally, once you have the essential stuff modeled, you can use the enhancing elements like decals and trim sheets and even Photoshop and textures to enhance the rest of the design. Most designs you see that look complex, they might actually be complex, but it's usually a combination of all the other stuff that comes after modeling that really makes it look more powerful. So don't stress too much about going overboard on this thing because it simply isn't necessary. What I am going to do here on the side, just to kind of make this a little bit more, exciting, is I could introduce like a small notch here on the side. Move this back, and maybe this is like a supporting element or something. We'll just make it square, and then we can go in here and bevel this. And this could be just a small supporting element we have here on the side, and we can mirror that. So now we have a bit of detail here on this side, also on the front, and then also on the top we have quite a bit. And then just to fix up some of that shading here, what we can do is put in another loop cut right to about there. Now be careful because this one could also interfere with the other areas here, but as long as it's just running straight through and we're kind of pushing that shading up, we should be fine, and it looks pretty good to me. So off topic, but I think I fixed my CPU cooler. It was going to 100 degrees Celsius when recording, and I was like, okay, this is just dangerous. So I took apart the side of the PC and I started like bending and twisting the tubes of the cooler because I think there's like an air bubble or something, and all of a sudden I started hearing the water flow through. So I think there was like a blockage. Maybe someone who knows a bit more about this stuff could give me an idea. But yeah, I think this cooler is just completely broken because it happened to me a few weeks ago. But now I'm recording in the mid 50s Celsius, so should be good to go without having the PC fry. Alright, so I think this is a good time to start introducing some decals and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and go into cycles mode, and I'm going to load in an HDRI. Now we could use a bunch of different HDRIs. One that I've liked recently comes from Alex Senechal's Studio HDRI pack. It's really, really cool. Looks very realistic, and it's called Gun Gradient. So I'm going to go ahead and load that one in real quick. You could find Studio HDRIs or HDRIs anywhere on Polyhaven as well. I'm just using one that I think is pretty cool. So I'm going to use this Gun Gradient Simple B. I'm going to load that in, and you're going to see how much different the lighting looks now. You can kind of see this was the before using the usual abandoned slipway, and now with the Studio it almost looks more realistic, which is awesome. So at this point we can go ahead and start introducing materials, and like I said, we're working on a material pack, but if you want to get 3 of our new materials completely for free, you can go to the link in the description and download those, and you can use them on your model. So the one I think I'm going to use here for this particular container, I could either use the aluminum or I could use the rough plastic. The other one in this pack is a rubber. I don't think we need the rubber for this scene. So let's try using the rough plastic. Even though this isn't a plastic thing, it might just look good in the scene. So let's go ahead and give it a try. So once you've downloaded those textures, all you really need to do is go into the shader editor, and we're going to connect these up, and we're going to need to add in a new material. You could use Blender's asset browser as well, but I'm just going to show you how to actually set up the material for the purposes of this tutorial. So first of all, make sure you have Node Wrangler enabled. So we'll go here, type in Node, turn on Node Wrangler in the add-ons panel. It comes with Blender, and we're going to press Control Shift and T. And once you do that, you should be able to navigate to I have a few more materials in here because they're like additional ones we haven't released to the public yet, but I'm going to use the rough plastic, which you should have access to, and I'm going to use you should only be receiving the 1K maps, so don't worry about that. Basically, take these 4 different PNG files, click on Principled Texture Setup. For some reason, it doesn't work with base color anymore. I don't know why. So what we're going to need to do is duplicate this image texture and then load in that base color manually, drag it to the base color, and then go here and drag this to the vector. Now, this is going to look absolutely crazy, and that's because we're using this based off of UV coordinates. So what we can do is simply use a Smart UV project, and we're going to get a good result, kind of. We might need to increase the scale here to about 20, so it's a lot more, realistic. And then we're just going to go here, give it the same material, and for the bottom, actually what we could do is select all these different pieces, shift select on the material, the one with the material, and then go here, and then copy material to selected. And you might need to re-unwrap some of these other ones as well if the shading looks a bit weird, or the texture projection. And once you've done that, you should have this result right here. It looks really clean. You kind of see this from both sides. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a floor. So Shift A, and we're going to go down to plane, and we're going to scale this plane up right to about here. And you can already see how much better this is looking. Now, since the plane is white, a lot of that white has been reflected back onto the object. So what we could do here is we could change the color around or make it darker or whatever, but you're going to see that basically reflects the light back onto the bottom, which in this case looks pretty good. So for the floor, we could try using the aluminum. Maybe that would look cool. So let's go ahead and add in a new material, and just like we did before, Control Shift T, I'm going to find that aluminum material. This one is really good, by the way, guys, so we're going to load that in. Again, we're going to have to duplicate this to add in the base color as well and connect those up. I would recommend using Blender's asset browser, so that way you only have to set it up once. If you don't know how to set it up, go to YouTube or Google. It's very easy to set up. And we're going to go here. And since this is a 1K texture, it looks very low resolution. So all we need to do, instead of using a higher resolution, which causes more memory usage, we can simply use a lower resolution and then scale it up with a mapping node. So we could try 20, or we could go even higher, 50. And look at how clean this aluminum is. It's very, very nice looking. And we can just kind of pan around, see how that looks. It's not too bad. And you can kind of see the light's coming more from this direction. So maybe an angle like this would give us the best composition. And also we could try making the rotation 90 degrees so it's kind of flowing this direction. I think that would look cool as well. So now we kind of have this composition more or less. We could also try using the synthetic rubber that comes with this pack and see how that looks. So just out of curiosity, we could add in a new material here. And we could try using the synthetic rubber material and just see how that one looks. I haven't really used this one too much yet, but it's a pretty good material. Our texture artist did a great job. Could try like 10. It's not too bad. It actually kind of has like this diffuse type of feeling to the floor, which I like. So I kind of like this a bit better, not gonna lie. So I'm gonna go ahead and use that material for the floor. And like I said, that does come with the pack in the description. So you can use the same exact materials I'm using. And what we could do at this point is kind of set up our camera, start introducing decals and things like that. So let's go ahead and press Shift A, camera, and then go to view, align view, and then align active camera to view. And I'm also going to use a higher focal length, maybe like 225. And if we press G, Z, Z, we can kind of move this back. And this is going to give us more of an orthographic type of composition, which is exactly what I want. So we can kind of move that to here. And then also, I'll probably end up duplicating this and moving like another one over here. But before we do any of that, it's going to be a very good idea to start introducing some decals and to make this thing pop. Now, I have a 3090, so my render is a little bit quick. If you're not using a powerful computer, you might just want to use look dev mode to do the decals. It'll be a lot quicker with very similar results, so you could just go into look dev and do the decals that way. So what I'm going to do here is use some of our decals. If you want to download our Sci-Fi Corporation decal pack, you can get that on our website for free as well. So maybe I could take one of these and I could put that on the bottom and then project it. We have plenty of decal machine tutorials if you don't know how to use it. So check those out, and we could make the alpha a little bit lower so we have that. Let's just go into rendered mode and see how it looks. Very, very cool. I definitely like that. And then I recommend here on the top, or maybe even on the side as well, we could do another decal, maybe like, you know, hazardous material or something like that, one of those decals. Ryu has plenty of decals on his page as well. If you just want to get all our decals and all our trim sheets and just avoid the headache, you can purchase our Ultimate Trim Sheet and Decal Pack. There are plenty of cool ones in there. Over 400 decals and over 20 trim sheets, so plenty of stuff in there. So I'm going to look for something that just looks cool. I don't know exactly what, you know, these mean because I didn't create them, and I don't speak Japanese, but, you know, the idea here is not necessarily to read what it says, but to have the you know, look going on. So we could project this and just kind of see, you know, how that looks on the actual design. I could even go to the back here and I could just, you know, drop one of these on the back. This is kind of something you'd see, you know, on an actual object like this. So let's go here. This would be the back view. We're not going to really see that area though, so maybe we could try one of these instead. This one's actually pretty cool. I have no clue what it means. Safety first. So we could use that, and this could be put... We could actually put that right there on the front, but let's make the alpha value about 0.2. And let's just make sure we're putting this right there in the front, more or less. We're going to project it. That looks good. Now we're also kind of covering this old decal. So let me delete this one out and then just re-add it. So we'll go in here and we could just re-add the same decal here. Could even put it on the top, but I think composition wise, right above this one would be even better. So we're going to do that, and we're going to project it. It looks good. And go back to camera view. And it looks like I put it on the wrong side, which isn't a big deal. what I can do is I can simply box select this, and I should be able to just rotate this 180 degrees. If the booleans are not going with it, what you might need to do is press Q, operations, and then late parents. So that way any cutters that aren't parented get parented, and then when we rotate that, it should be fine. And the boolean should carry along with it, which it kind of did. Looks like this boolean here did not want to carry with it. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm just going to smart apply everything because I am happy with the result here. So let me just select everything, Q, operations, and then smart apply. And now if I rotate this, we shouldn't really have any issues at all. So RZ 180, there we go. Sometimes when you're rotating a bunch of different objects with different booleans applied to it, it just doesn't work out as well. And you can see these decals really help to kind of emphasize this overall design, which I really like. So you're going to see the side of this is pretty dark. We might want to brighten this up a bit. A lot of people would usually use lights here. I would not recommend doing that because if we add in like a point lamp, yes, it's going to highlight the side, but it's going to give you this really like weird reflection. Even if you make the radius larger and more diffuse with higher power, this is not the way you want to do it. It just looks awful. Instead, you want to use a reflector to bounce the light back naturally. It has all this diffuse light bouncing back without issues. So we're going to add in a plane. We're going to rotate this plane 90 degrees. And we're just going to scale this up. Now the planes by default are a white color, so that's good. What we can do is we can move this back, kind of rotate it and scale it up. And you're going to see by doing that, we're basically reflecting the light. The light's coming from here, bouncing to the reflector, and then back to the object. In my opinion, it's pretty strong. So what I'm going to do is maybe scale this up pretty large, add in a material for this one. And on reflectors, you generally want to make these fully rough. And then we can just tweak the base color. So instead of making this super dark, you know, we could give it a little bit of brightness by just doing that. And you can see if I delete it, it's completely different. Here's before and here is after. So, you know, using a reflector is always a good idea just to kind of highlight the side a little bit more, just make it look a bit more natural. Maybe even rotate that. So again, there's the before, it's really dark, and there's the after, it's a little bit brighter and not so eye-pulling. So that looks great. And what we could do at this point, by the way, make sure the reflector is not inside the camera frame. It should be just outside of it like that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and duplicate this entire piece. So I'm just going to go into wireframe mode, box select this entire thing, and then I can just duplicate it with Shift D, rotate it. I could even, you know, rotate it onto its side. So 90 degrees, and then I can move this down onto the floor. And you could use all sorts of different, you know, design choices and rendering effects, but I think rotating this on the side looks pretty cool. Only issue I have with it is it's kind of defying gravity. You know, you'd expect this thing to be rolling. So ideally this would be like sitting against something. But then when I do that, it kind of looks weird. So you want to be careful in the way you choose your composition. You could do this, but it might even be a good idea to introduce like a little thing right here that kind of stops it from rolling. I'm thinking, you know, on vehicles, when you're trying to work on a car and make sure it doesn't roll back, you put those little wheel wedges. Can't say that, it's like a tongue twister. Those little wheel wedges, you can put that like right in between that to indicate that, you know, it's not able to move. So you could do something like that. You could simply make sure this is standing straight up instead of putting it on the side, and just introduce like a different angle. So you could go for like an angle more like this. And you can just see different positions give you different compositions. And this is why spending the time sitting, figuring out what looks good is a good idea. But don't be boring. Don't just make a mirror of it, because it doesn't really introduce any sort of visual interest. I'd really recommend kind of tweaking it by rotating it and doing, you know, cool stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just go with rotation. Maybe this thing's just super heavy and it's not able to move, whatever it may be. So that could work. Let's also make sure this is actually on the floor. So we can go into wireframe mode and make sure this is sitting right above that plane. and not anywhere below it. And then really all you have to do is turn off the overlays and just, keep moving this around, figure out what type of composition you want. It's okay to cut it off in the frame. Just see if it looks weird. Sometimes it might look weird, like in this case. It's always okay to crop it off the frame, but you have to be careful, otherwise it just doesn't look good. So you want to be careful with that. Another thing I could do, if it's a little bit too tight within the frame, is instead of moving these objects closer together, what I could do is move the camera away. So I can select the camera outline, G, Z, Z, move the camera back a bit, and now we have a little bit more breathing space for these objects. So I could box select these again, and of course I could rotate them. And just find a good angle. Now, like I said, I do want to use a bevel shader because we do have some artifacts here. Now from camera view, I can't really see the artifacts, to be honest. So we don't have to worry too much about it, but if you did want to avoid those artifacts, maybe you could see them. Simply remove the bevel modifier, go into the shader editor, and what we can do is we can select this piece and then drop in a bevel node right here, and between the two make this like 0.02, and now we actually have a bevel shader instead of a physical bevel, and you can kind of see that it looks pretty much exactly the same. So if you want to, you can use a bevel shader, which will avoid those artifacts, but honestly from camera view I can't even see those artifacts. So like I said, this is a concept render. If this were to be a game asset, I would have to clean up those artifacts because it would cause problems, but for renders it doesn't matter. So I'm going to move this camera a little bit more to the right so there's not so much space here. And I think this looks awesome. So the only thing I don't like here is the fact that we have the same decal on this one and on this one, and also the fact that this is a little bit dark here. So simply put, I'm going to take this decal, if I can select it, we can just go into solid view. I'm going to take this decal and delete it, and just see how that looks. It's actually pretty cool. I prefer that. I could even use like a different decal there if I wanted to. I could also select, if I can zoom in and actually catch it, I could also select this decal here. There we go. Sometimes you just have to zoom in and be able to select it. And I could make this alpha value on this one a little bit higher, just so that pops a bit more. It's kind of up to you. But so we have a basic barrel right here, and then we have a more detailed one kind of over here. So composition wise, this is great because I can kind of see that I have some room here to put text in post-processing. So I can put like my brand or my ArtStation account or whatever. So I could do that. And then also a lot of the frame is filled, which is more or less what I want. And I think we're ready to render. By the way, this is a little bit dark down here. It's almost pure black when you get to the bottom, which I would like to highlight a bit more. But we're actually going to be able to do this easily in Photoshop. I'll show you why. If I delete the floor, watch what happens. Now, since we don't have a dark floor bouncing up the dark light, you can kind of see the bottom is completely illuminated. So what I can do is I can render this scene, and then I can render a separate one without the floor, and I could kind of blend these together in Photoshop to make this highlight a little bit more on the bottom, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So the first thing we need to do is render this. So what we're going to do, make sure we're set to 2560 by 1440. I always like to use a higher resolution because I can downscale later if I need to. I'm also going to make sure that under the rendering panel, under render, we have denoise turned on, and the max samples does not need to be very high. We can use something like 256 and the denoise will take care of the rest. And there's not really much else to do here. Make sure you're happy with the render, and then go ahead and press the F12 key or whatever the Mac equivalent is. And we're just going to go ahead and let this thing render out. It should only take a few seconds, even with a weaker machine, because the denoise usually does a good job. And then all we have to do is save this scene. So we're going to go to image and then save as. And what I'm going to do here is save it as a 16-bit TIFF. So now once we've done that, we can go ahead and delete the floor And make sure if you don't have this transparent background like I have, you just go here to the render panel, go under film, and turn on transparent. We want to make sure that's turned on, so that way we have a nice cutout of these objects. And then what we're going to do is we're going to render this one separately. So we'll press F12, and this again should only be a few seconds to render depending on your machine. And just wait for that to finish. And then just make sure before you close out of your Blender scene, you press Ctrl Z to undo that, so that way you bring the floor back. Then you can go ahead and save the scene, Ctrl S, make sure that's all saved up. And now we can go into Photoshop and really make this final image pop and ready to upload to our portfolio. Alright, so the image manipulation software you use doesn't particularly matter as long as it's not Microsoft Paint. Ideally something where you can use layers and functionality like that. I prefer Photoshop. Affinity Photo is great. I'm sure there's other ones out there, but I think Photoshop is well worth the monthly investment. So what we're going to do here is we're going to first take the cutout piece and shift click the layer and drag it over. Going to drop it in, and already you can see what that has done. It has basically overlaid these barrels onto these ones in the exact same position because the render was the same. And you're going to see it's quite lit up now, but that's not exactly as bright as I wanted it to be. So what I'm going to do instead is drop this opacity. I'm going to drop it maybe to, let's try 50%. And if I turn this off and on, look at how much more bright this is. Maybe a little bit too bright. Let's try 25%, maybe even 15. Again, I don't want to make this too bright on the bottom. I do want to make it pop a little bit more though, and you can see that's a little bit better. Now, another cool thing about this cutout here is not only because of the change in the color here, but also if I control click on this layer, we have a perfect selection of these barrels. So if I was trying to do some masking magic or something like that, usually I would have to go in here and use something like the pen tool to like cut this out manually, and it's just a pain. So that's why in Blender, if you have a transparent background and you only cut out the objects, you can also use this as a selection mask, which is awesome. We're going to be doing that here shortly. So now that I have this as I want, I'm going to press Ctrl Alt Shift and E to combine everything together. And now what we're going to do is go to Filter and then Camera Raw Filter and do some basic adjustments. Now generally in post-processing, you want this to look good and appealing for your portfolio, so you want to be careful not to overdo the effects but also not to underdo it. You want to get that sweet middle ground. So generally what I do is I try to, depending on the scene, brighten it up a bit, so maybe like 0.25 for the brightness. Contrast I do differently. I'm going to leave contrast at 0. Highlights will basically bring out the highlights a bit. You could tweak that if you wanted to, kind of pops out those highlights. Shadows, I'll show you what to do with that in a second. Whites and blacks, you can either lift the whites, lift the blacks, or vice versa. Now, one very important tool you can use here is called clarity. If I increase clarity, what this does, even though you can't see it too much, is it actually brings additional clarity to the scene. Now, also, notice when I increase clarity, it lifts those shadows. So what you want to do is you want to drag the shadows up to about the same number as clarity here, so that way you're kind of counteracting the effect. You're getting the clarity without too much shadows. And then at this point I can go ahead and lift the texture a little bit. You don't want to go too heavy or it's just going to look weird, but maybe just a little bit on the texture. We can click OK. So now this is the before and this is the after. Look at how much better it is. So this is the basic adjustment you want to do to your objects. So you don't have to go overboard with it. You just want to do like the bare basic to just kind of make it pop a bit more. Now the next thing I want to do is introduce a little bit of local contrast. A very simple way to do this is to go to the curves panel here under adjustments, go to this little finger icon, find a really bright area and drag up a little bit, and then find a really dark area and drag down a little bit. And maybe not like pure black, but maybe like around here. Let me try this again. It's not working as expected. There we go. So maybe sample somewhere around here, drag this down a bit. And this is more or less going to give you this S curve, not like a full S, but more or less in that shape. So you could do this manually if you wanted to, but generally I find this to be a much better solution. So basically we'll drag that down, and then the bright areas we drag up. So this is just going to introduce a little bit of local contrast on the object. You can already see it kind of pops a bit more. You could also drag this down a bit more manually if you wanted to, or drag this up a bit more manually depending, on the level of brightness you want. I think this is pretty decent. I don't want to make this too bright. You want to be careful that the histogram isn't like getting pushed too far, but I think this will be okay. Now, another really cool trick you can do in Photoshop is you can go here to the color lookup and use some of these pre-made lookup tools. Now, one of my favorites is this 2-strip look. You can also use different ones here. Basically, you can just scroll through these and just find, cool ones. This is kind of interesting, actually. It looks very industrial. So maybe I'll use this one. And it's a bit strong, so maybe I'll make the opacity about 50%. And you can just kind of see it almost has like a more industrial look on the actual object. This one's pretty good as well. I just can't decide which one I want. I'm going to go with that Fuji. I like that one. And then what we could do is we could introduce a little bit of noise. Now, the best way to do this is to, first of all, go to this layer. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the camera raw filter. It's always a good idea to introduce a little bit of a noise layer. So we can go down here to effects. We can lift the grain. You don't want to go too high, but just lift this just enough to kind of introduce some grainy effects onto the scene. It almost makes it look a bit more three-dimensional, which is particularly why I like to do that. Now you can see the texture we used on the object already had those effects, but this just kind of enhances it a bit more in my opinion. And then at this point, all we really need to do is maybe play with the color adjustments. I usually use plugins for this, but for the tutorial, I'm not. We could use, color balance if we wanted to, and maybe make this a bit more on the blue side or on the yellowish side. It just kind of depends on your style, right? So we make this a bit colder by dragging the midtones a bit to the blue and then a bit to the cyan. You could also make the shadows a bit blue if you wanted to. But you want to be careful because there are a lot of darker areas in this scene, so you don't want to go too heavy. We could do that, and then maybe for the highlights, it's not going to do too much, but if you want to make the highlights a tad bit blue, feel free. I think I'm just going to keep these both at 0 though. I kind of like how this looks right now. Here's the before, here's the after, a little bit colder almost. Now once you're kind of happy with these effects, you can press Control, Alt, Shift, and E to combine everything together. And generally what I do at the end is I like to introduce a little bit of a vignette. You don't have to go too crazy with it, but a little bit of a vignette always helps to kind of enclose the image. So you can kind of see what I mean by that. And now we have this really clean render, which is exactly what I was going for. And this is why I recommend post-processing your work, guys, because do you want this on your portfolio when someone's looking at it, potentially going to hire you? Or do you want something that looks just a little bit more visually appealing, like this? Everyone's doing it. Every artist you follow, every Instagram model you follow, whatever it is, they're always enhancing the pictures to make it look a little bit more visually appealing. Give it an extra point or two. So definitely go through this process. It's very helpful and makes your work look a lot more impressive. The last thing I'm going to do here is take my Blender Bros logo and drag this in. I'm going to press Control T. And then just move this up here. And I'm just going to make the opacity a lot lower. So now what I have is I have our Blender Bros branding. So you could put your ArtStation portfolio, your Instagram profile, whatever it is. And it's always a good idea to do that just to make the image pop a little bit more, just like that. And that, guys, is how you do it. That is how you go through the full design process to create a really cool image just like this. And like I said, you can get the materials we use in this tutorial completely free. Just go to the link in the description, and also check out some of our hard surface modeling courses and products. A lot of those go more in depth into the type of stuff I'm showing you here on YouTube. So head over to blenderbros.com, check out the stuff we have over there. I think you'll enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next one.